a copy, and I'm going to start up the Facebook stream. It'll take a minute. You're not instantly on Facebook right now. Don't worry.
Gone viral yet?
Not yet. It takes at least 30 seconds. And however long it takes for the internet to, okay.
I've had a banner for 30 seconds that says meeting is now streaming live.
Oh, great. I think we might be on. I'm just going to check the page on Facebook and make sure that we are in fact live, and it looks like we are. So hello to everyone who is watching right now or who might be watching later. It's so great to spend this short amount of time with you. I'm the Reverend Joan Javier Duval, minister of the Unitarian Church of Montpelier. And this afternoon, I am joined by a few people who have been working hard on our air quality project. So first, I'll introduce Vic Guadagno, president of the UCM Governing Board. Vic, can you say hello?
Hello, nice to see you, everybody.
And then we also have Alan Clark, who is a member of our property committee and also the air quality group. Alan, can you say hello to everyone?
Hello. Hello.
And finally, we have Paul Ohlson, who's currently the chair of our property committee and also a member of the air quality group.
Hello, everybody.
So for anyone who might be watching live with us, hello, welcome, and feel free to post any comments you might have or any questions as you listen to what's being discussed today. And at the end of our time and our short bit of dialogue, I'll check to see if there are any questions or comments and pose those to everyone, and we'll try to respond as best we can. So we are here to talk about a proposed air quality project. And let's start with why we're talking about air quality. Vic, can you start things off for us?
Sure, I'd love to. It's nice to see everyone. Thanks for having me as part of this conversation. And I did just want to say, and I'm getting in the habit of doing this, of reminding ourselves what we're in the midst of, right? Not even in the midst of anymore. It's a year. We are a year into a global pandemic. And with that, I think comes somewhat a bit of grief and a bit of trauma, right? We haven't seen our families in over a year in a lot of cases, and we're starting to normalize wearing masks. We're well beyond that. Now that we're getting a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, I notice there's some stress around when you run into people and are they not wearing a mask? And so it's just really important to remember how difficult this is. And I think along with that is that we need to be really gentle with each other and patient with each other and kind with each other as we're going through these. So here we are talking about a potential big project. And even before I get to your question, I do want to give a thanks to the COVID task force who have been meeting over the last year regularly, 2, sometimes 3 times a month, and really doing a great job. First, helping us realize that we couldn't get in the building, but we could have partial use of the building, and that's been really important as the staff has gotten back in, and then giving us these guidelines of how we're going to get back to it. And along with that comes this issue of air quality. And the way I think about it is what we've gotten used to is that we wear masks, we keep social distance, and we have good air quality, which in a lot of cases means go outside. So I know that through tracking the work you've done over the last year, there was a time when you started to say, okay, we're going to go back to the building. What about air quality? And as we'll talk about, air quality is certainly an issue at our church at the moment. So, and the other thing too is we're starting to see, as I mentioned, a light at the end of the tunnel. But as experts are starting to predict, it's been 100 years since the last global pandemic. They're starting to say it may not be that long till the next one. So it's really important that these airborne diseases are addressed at this point in time. And with the church, we want, our priorities are accessibility and we're trying to look after everyone, and the choices that we make affect others now and in the future. So the air quality issue at the church is a really important, it's the most important one we have as we start to consider how we can use that wonderful old building of ours.
Yeah, thanks for that, Vic. And I'll just add to that the COVID task force has done some really important work now for almost a year. And I think it's a priority of everyone that we are able to come back together in person again as soon as possible. But to do so in a way that's welcoming and inclusive, that prioritizes the well-being of everyone, that respects science, right? That we want to really consider science as we have all along during this COVID-19 pandemic. And that really thinks about the well-being of all of us. Yeah. So I know that there's already been a lot of research that's been done into air quality and in particular inside our building. Alan, can you tell us a bit about how the church's research into this issue came about?
Well, in actual fact, we started doing this sort of research back with Building for the Future because we knew we had air quality issues, but we didn't know the importance of them until COVID struck. And then early on in the COVID, I mean, we closed down in March of 2020, but we thought all we had to do was clean surfaces. You got to get your chlorine wipes and wipe all the light switches and everything. And then as late as last summer, the World Health Organization and the CDC said, it's important to clean surfaces, and they weren't talking about air quality. And then some virologists who understand this sort of thing got involved, and they said, it's the airborne particles. We know that from all kinds of, not just COVID, but from all kinds of virus particles. And so then the National Academy of Sciences got involved and said, it's air quality, it's airborne disease. And so by fall, there were articles in NPR and New York Times, every place. I mean, oh yeah, it's air quality. And so a small group of us started looking at what are the issues of air quality for the Unitarian Church of Montpelier. And we started to investigate what we had already done with Building for the Future. And we talked in January of this year, we talked to Efficiency Vermont about contractors and how we would approach the project because they have a lot of concept. And they said, yeah, all the schools are already doing this. And so we realized, okay, we got a contractor list. The contractor list really was people who could install it if we knew what we wanted. And so then we had to look for somebody who could design what we really needed, could look at our church and say, here's how we think you should do it. So we went online looking for who could do this, and this group called CX Associates, they had articles that explained about COVID and air filtration and air dilution and all that sort of thing. And that was the real breakthrough. I mean, granted that Barbara Conray on our group understood that stuff back when we were doing Building for the Future, but now we really had some solid information that we could base everything on. And it was based on regulatory guidelines. It's based on the American Society of Heating and Air Conditioning Refrigeration Engineers have guidance and all that sort of thing, so that we could, start to design. And so CX came in, looked at the system, had prepared a preliminary report, which is on the website. And we've learned a lot in the few months since that report came out, and so we're still modifying and improving. And but we use that as a basis to ask people if they would be willing to do the build part. And they said, we said, there's been rumors about our asbestos. So then we had to do asbestos research, so to speak, and had discovered that we have to get rid of that asbestos before any of them would touch the ductwork and do the important things that needed to improve air quality. So that's about where the research is, that we've got to move forward on, each step to get this to happen.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alan. And as you were describing that shift from our collective focus in responding to the pandemic with, disinfecting and everything, and how right at the start, I mean, that just takes me back to thinking about those first few days and weeks, and how, at the church, for example, there was a volunteer team that came together to wipe down the sanctuary pews. That seemed so important to do before we had even shut down. There was maybe 1 or 2 Sundays when, the cognizance of COVID was with us. And so there was the sanctuary pew wiping team, right, and stocking up on all the disinfectants. And I know we did that at home, and masking and everything didn't come for a few months. And then now we know what we know about COVID being airborne. Yeah. Would you just say, Alan, quickly, you mentioned you used you referred to a we. Can you just say who the we is? Who are the people who were kind of most involved with the research?
Right, from a physical point of view, of course, it was Paul Ohlson on the other screen, and I already mentioned Barbara Conray, who being an architect really understood a lot of the things that and helped us develop our understanding of what we need to know and do.
Yeah, and you mentioned also CX Associates. Now they're based in Burlington, is that right?
That's right. That's right. And I gave him a call. I chatted with our primary contact, Aveline Killian, and she came in, and we talked several ideas that included. Well, we'll talk maybe later after you start to see what the ideas are that we're proposing, but it included things that we thought aesthetically might not work, and that's why it became more complicated.
Yeah, great. Well, I think all of this begs the question of what the current status of our air quality is inside the church building. And Paul, will you speak to that question?
I'd be happy to, although it's difficult to, because you can't see the air and you can't touch it. It's hard to evaluate. It's not like a strawberry. It's hard to know what it's like. So I'd like to take you all on a little trip with me, and maybe we can demonstrate this. As we creep into summer, Mary Jane and I go camping. We go camping with a large group of friends, several of whom are part of our church community. And if you've been camping and you're inside of a tent, you'll know that there are times when it starts to rain and you zip up the door and you zip up the windows and you make sure that the tent flaps won't let any water in. And after a while, you notice that there's something different about the breathing. There's something about the air quality that's different. And the reason that that's so is because you are in an environment where the air does not change. And that, as it turns out, is exactly our status at the Unitarian Church of Montpelier. We have a heating system which takes the air that we exhale in the sanctuary. It takes it through ducts and pipes and takes it back to the furnace, and it heats it up and it sends it back to the vestry, to the sanctuary, to the fireplace room, to the kitchen. But it doesn't clean it. It doesn't exhaust any of that stale air, and it doesn't bring any fresh air in. It's sort of like being in a tent. Well, if it's a big tent and you're the only person in it, you may not feel much different. But if you've got 200 people in that tent and you're not changing the air, believe me, the air quality suffers. Now, how do we know this? Well, we know it from all the science and all the testing and all the research that's been done this year. But my friend Alan Clark and I tested the air before and after a large meeting at one point, and we saw the carbon dioxide level go up and up and up. And it was at the very, very top of the acceptable range. And that's another reason we need to change the air. So in terms of the status, I would say the status of our air quality is poor. Now, you can say, well, we've lived with this for a long time, and that's true. But we haven't known what we know now for 154 of those years. And we know different things now, which says we must take action. And that's what we're planning to do.
And if I could add to that, Paul, that you know, the CO2, much of what I've read is basically a surrogate for, you're not getting rid of CO2, you're not getting rid of virus aerosols, you're not getting rid of anything. And stale is a great word, Paul.
And it's the CO2 levels in particular that, Ellen, you mentioned that back with our Building for the Future project, we were already looking at how do we improve air quality. And that was sort of the main thing we were looking at. Is that right?
That's
Sort of,
correct.
yeah, yeah. Well, it seems like, I love the tent metaphor, Paul. Thank you for that. It seems like, okay, well, if we want to improve the air quality, just like a tent, in a tent, you just unzip the zippers and let in some fresh air. Seems like, okay, with our building, we've got a lot of windows. They're pretty big. Can't we just open those? Or what's the best way to improve the indoor air quality?
That's an excellent point, Joan. If we lived in Hawaii, where the temperature was always 55 to 75, we could open windows more and we wouldn't have this issue. But unfortunately, we don't. And so for much of the year, it's cold and we need to heat the air. And right now, our heating system just recirculates the air. And so those aerosols that Alan was mentioning just are going to go around and around until they do either one of two things. Either they find a new host or they die. Those are the options. And it's pretty grim. We want to minimize those aerosols. That's no question about it. And that's what this project is aimed at doing.
Yeah. So Alan, tell us more about the how. How do we go about then improving air quality?
The basic principle is that we need to dilute out those aerosols, just like we need to dilute out the carbon dioxide. And there's really only a couple of ways to do it. And that is that you basically bring in fresh air and throw out the stale air, or you filter that air very carefully so that you get rid of most of that aerosol. And depending on the filter, but you really won't filter out the carbon dioxide, but you do have a removal of those aerosols. And so the dilution of the fresh outside air and the filtration of the circulating air, it sounds really simple. That's all you have to do. But in fact, there's lots of steps, lots of consideration, and I'm sure we'll cover that. And by the way, there's lots of FAQs about that on the website. Frequently asked questions with some answers.
Great. Yes, absolutely. So sounds simple, but there's a lot more to it. So what are all of these steps, Paul? I think you're going to tell us about that.
Yes, there are 6 steps that we need to take. But before we go into the steps, I just want to say that in other years, we've had the luxury of bringing lots of people together to have dialogue about issues like this. And unfortunately, we can't do that this year. So this church and the management and the leadership in this church is trying so hard to provide opportunities for our congregants to understand what we're facing. And it's so hard to understand it when, as I say, you can't see it, you can't touch it. And yet we're going to have to go ahead and make decisions relatively soon, in a couple of weeks. So I do urge people to look at the website, as Alan said, and to come to any of these talks in coffee after church, to come to anything you can on Zoom to learn about it so that we can move ahead. The 6 steps are as follows. The first is for the congregation to understand what we're talking about and to approve both the concept and the money necessary to deliver the concept. We hope that will happen on the 6th of June. Then what we're going to do, the second step, is to have this engineering outfit in Burlington, CX Associates, develop a plan. And this is an incredibly sophisticated plan that will do all the things that Alan was describing earlier. And they'll take a month, 5 weeks maybe, to develop it. The third step is that we're going to send it out to vendors. These are HVAC and engineers who install these kind of systems, and we will get their bids. We will look at those bids and we will work with the designer and say who best can accomplish what you've designed and what we want for the church. Then we will award a bid, and the fourth step is to bring in a firm, a different contractor who will remove the ductwork. And 10, 20, 15 years ago, someone would come in with claw hammers and just pull all this stuff down, throw it out the window in the air, and put it into a container. And as Alan has said so well, this is controlled appropriately so very, very well by the state and federal government. You can't handle asbestos lightly. You've really got to handle this carefully. So we're going to have people coming in here in suits and hazmat equipment. We're not going to have anybody in the church while this fourth step happens. When that's all gone and it's certified that it's clean of asbestos, then step 5 is the winning contractor on the design will come in and implement the new system. And they will put up the ductwork, the filters that Alan talked about, the heat recovery ventilation units that will be used up there. And part of this system, if we took in a lot of fresh air in the middle of the winter and heated it from 5 degrees below zero up to 68 degrees, we're going to be having the furnace running a lot. And of course, that's fuel oil. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're taking this stale air that we've breathed and we're sending it outside. But it's more complicated than that, because as it goes out, it's going to heat an exchanger, which on the other side is going to heat incoming cold air, so that we use our furnace to heat the air from the outside after it's already been preheated by the exhausting stale air. And that's expensive on the one hand, but it's going to be a huge savings down the line. So when that's all installed, the sixth and final step is to have our engineering contractor from Burlington, CX, come back, look at the system, test the system, commission it, and say to us at the Unitarian Church of Montpelier, it is doing exactly what I have designed it to do. So those are the 6 steps. And if we get the start, we hope we will, with congregational approval on the 6th of June, and everything else falls into line as we think it may, then before really cold weather in December, we think we'll have a new system that will provide us with far, far better air quality.
Wow, thank you for walking us through all of that, Paul. There's so much involved and a lot to follow, and a lot of it, I'll just say for me, on the engineering side is sort of but above my pay grade, as they say, right, as the minister, and yet so important, I think, to understand some of the intricacies. And I just want to stay a little bit longer on the sort of the planning and what this would mean for the building, because I imagine some people are kind of wondering about, gosh, it sounds like a lot of duct work, and where's that all going to go? And do we need new vents? Could you, I don't know, Alan or Paul, just explain a little bit more on that? Where is all of this air exchanging and heating and happening physically in the building?
It's going to happen in the basement. The air is going to be brought into the basement. It's going to be exhausted. It's going to be exchanged in the basement. It's going to be filtered in the basement. It's going to be heated by the furnace and sent out to the ducts that we currently have that go vertically up to the vestry and to the sanctuary. So there'll be very little. I think if you walk through the vestry before any work is done in the cellar, if you walk through the sanctuary before any work is being done, and then you walk through afterwards, I think you would notice no difference whatsoever.
But because the edition from 1984 edition is a little different, we'll have to bring in fresh air that way. It has no recirculating air. It doesn't have furnaces. It has baseboard heating. So just so you know that we haven't forgotten that part of the building. And the design would be probably to put this HRV, this heat recovery ventilation system, someplace up in the attic above the organ and bring ductwork in. So you'll have a couple of new vents in the nursery and in the children's chapel. And then, some of the smaller rooms, maybe we may want to keep standalone HEPA filters or something in them. So these are all the kind of the fine tuning of the plan, but conceptually, we've got that worked out too.
Can I ask a quick question? Well, actually, I have two questions if you don't mind, but I'll ask them at the same time. Paul, I know you had mentioned the critical, because we talked about, cool, can we phase this like we often do with other projects? Can we do the design and then decide after the design? But you had mentioned about the decreasing availability of contractors and material. Can you comment about that? And then I find this very intriguing. And Alan, you mentioned earlier about hearkening back to the BFF, the Building for the Future. How does this relate to that? Or it seems as if this is foundational work that would have been done anyway. Can you elaborate on that? So first, the availability of contractors and then the connection with the BFF.
Sure. Why don't I talk about the first one, Alan, and perhaps you pick up the BFF second one. We need to move fairly quickly if we want to get this project complete before the cold weather in December of this year. And from what I believe the COVID task force has suggested is this is really an essential piece of work for the church to do if we want to come back in the entirety of the services and the things we do in the vestry as we have in the past. This is really essential. We can't in good conscience move ahead to do that if we know that we've got poor air quality and we're not doing anything. So this is what we're going to do. We propose to do there. And it's critical. The sequence is sort of like a set of dominoes that go down. And we can't do something and not do something else and something else. For instance, one of the thoughts is, oh my gosh, we've got asbestos on the heat ducts. This is an asbestos tape that wraps every juncture of this heating system. And it's, I don't know, 60, 70, 80 years old, and it's degrading and it's dangerous. So we said, well, it would make sense to get that stuff out of there now. So if we get the heat ducts out of there and we can't heat, and then there's problems with the contract or finding contractors that could put the new system in, and then we're starting to get into September, October, or November, and we don't have that done, then we've got the prospect of going through a winter, not only without people coming in, but without heat. And we can't afford to do that. So we have to have the contractors lined up one after another to do this work. And we're not the only game in town. The schools are realizing the same issues that we have, other churches, other large meeting places and buildings. So the contractors are in great demand, and we want to get in line as soon as we possibly can so that this could conceivably all be done before next winter. Alan?
Okay, and then moving on to the Building for the Future basis was that the concept of air quality was important, whether it's filtration and makeup air and both of those. But a lot has changed in the couple of years since we kind of put the Building for the Future on hold. There's been a lot of discussion about, oh, we were going to use wood pellet heating, and now there's people saying, well, wood pellets aren't as sensitive to the environment as everybody thinks, and maybe we could use biofuels in the furnaces and other, so those kinds of things would need to be revisited. There's also been some discussion, particularly with this COVID project, about, why don't we switch to heat pumps while we're doing all of this? and the reality is, on a 0-degree day, the heat pumps, no matter what you call them as low temperature heat pumps, don't really work well, and they don't really heat a room with a high ceiling like the sanctuary very well, because all the heat rises up to the top, and they're much, much slower than a furnace. So that we really, and ultimately, if you're going to put in fresh air, you need it to recirculate, to go around and around, get that fresh air moved around, not just poked in at one corner of the building, of the room. And we have fundamentally a pretty good design in our ductworks from the point of view of distribution. There may be a concern about whether they're the right size, and this will be a chance to right size them and make any changes that are needed. But fundamentally, we have modified what we're thinking of for the building for the future, but it will be applicable for when building for the future starts up.
Thanks for that,
Close enough?
Alan.
Close enough, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'll just insert here a reminder for anyone who might have just started watching on Facebook, that we will have a time for any questions or comments that you want to make. You can just add those right into the Facebook Live video post. If you have a question or a comment you want to write, I am monitoring Facebook while I'm also on here on Zoom with Vic and Paul and Alan. And so I'll read off anything that might show up there. So the specific air quality project that we've been discussing, which would bring in makeup air into the building, allow for some purification and filtration, and improve the indoor air quality. All of it, it sounds like a rather expensive undertaking. And I'm wondering, Vic, could you talk with us about the project cost and how we might, as a church community, go about funding this?
Sure. The cost, as the COVID task force has estimated them, are up to $250,000, which does include $40,000 for the design, and it also includes the asbestos removal abatement. And the proposal is that that comes from the long-term investment fund. And then it has been pointed out that if we commit the long-term investment funds, we don't spend it right off the bat. We start the process and we spend it through time. And during that time, there's other avenues that we can seek to pay for it. There's grants available. And there's also perhaps a capital campaign that we could get back into that we were proposing with the BFF. Now, I have started to learn a little bit about the long-term investment fund and an endowment fund, as I heard it called the other day. And it's an interesting history. It goes back to the turn of the 19th century when I think $1,000 was donated in 1898. And then just 4 or 5 years later came a $31,000 contribution. And that is a substantial amount of money. And so with that came some change to the bylaws and the governance that says, okay, we now have this permanent fund, and let's make sure we spend it wisely. Typically, we take out 4% a year for capital improvements on the building. This will certainly be the biggest expenditure from it in my relatively short time, but perhaps throughout history, this would certainly be the biggest expenditure of it. The long-term investment fund is doing quite well. Over the last 5 years, it's gone up. It's currently at 1.3 million. And so this proposal would be 250,000 spent from that, which would be 22% of the long-term investment fund. So yeah, I will add that we've talked about maybe trying to do something similar to this with those that are very knowledgeable about the long-term investment fund. I mean, this being what we were saying earlier on, perhaps the first UCM podcast, but we might try to put together one in the next 2 or 3 weeks leading up to the June 6th special meeting that discusses what that is, the history of it, what it's there for. It does say in the bylaws, this is for, quote, used under the stress of need. So arguably this is a time of need.
Yeah, absolutely, Vic. Thanks for that overview. And I agree. And I'm so grateful that this church, this congregation does have an endowment. Not every institution has an endowment that one might use in a time of crisis like we're in, or that we're emerging from. So I am just so thankful that, all of those, I don't know the total number of people who have, made bequests over the years and helped us to have this. endowment, but to all of them. I'm just so thankful that they, in their generosity and in their own, gratitude for what this church has meant to them, made donations of all kinds of sizes, right? That we now can reap the benefits. And we've been stewarding those funds, over many years, keeping them safely away, using it very responsibly for a time like this, right? When, gosh, if we want to get back together in a way that is safe, and that we can all be back in the same space, we really need this kind of investment. So I'm going to check out our Facebook Live and see if I see that several people have been watching. I don't know how many people are still there. I don't see any comments though posted from anyone or any questions. So I'll just turn it back to everyone who's on the Zoom, Alan or Paul or Vic. Is there anything else that you'd want to say? Any final remarks you want to make about this project? Vic?
Yeah, I did want to say, I think Meredith Warner and Peter Toms are, well, retired, but very active historian, provided this document. And it's really intriguing to go through, and just scrolling down, I've seen like 30 donations through the years with little stories as to the people that donated to the fund. So it's a really interesting document. But I did want to say something that Alan brought up about right sizing the size of the ductwork. I just will add that the Worship and Arts Committee and the tech team have really been conscious of the audio, the wonderful audio in our sanctuary. And that is a priority, that will not be affected by the airflow. And that can be accomplished if it is stated as a priority through the proper size ducts and how the ducts are mounted, so that the audio, that I just want people to know that that's a priority of ours, to retain the beautiful sound within the sanctuaries.
Yeah, and what little I've read suggests that, are keeping the project in the basement. We still have all the reflection off the ceiling and the walls and the back wall and so forth, and that there's every reason to expect that will be okay. But yeah, you don't know until you know. Yeah, and for me, Joan, I just kind of get buried in the details and the weeds of all this project and every little tiny thing, and certainly happy if anybody online in the church is interested in chatting about those. I'd be happy to do that. But every once in a while I come up for air and I just kind of say, this is an important project and we got to do this. So that's me.
Go ahead, Paul. You look like you want to say something too.
Yeah, the first time this seriously came up was probably 3 years ago, as Alan mentioned, in the Building for the Future project. And at that time, I was somewhat skeptical. And I thought, we've breathed this air for 150 years. And as far as I know, it's been fine. Why would we spend all this money to do something that we might not notice and might not make much of a difference? And I can answer my own question by saying that what we've learned in the last 15 months has just changed absolutely everything. And we do know that if we do a project like this now, the air will be healthier and safer for everybody. And it would just be absolutely, from my perspective, unthinkable, unconscionable to just say, no, we're going to go back and just breathe it and good luck. It's just not the approach to go. So I have really moved a lot in the last 2 or 3 years. And part of that movement has been as a result of Alan and Barbara, who have done just incredible groundwork and done the research and answered the questions. And it's been a privilege to work with them and to come up with this solution, which is, I think, far-ranging. I think this not just deals with the situation today, but that in 2 years, 5 years, if something else like this happens, we are prepared. And that's worth a lot, I think.
Thank you all so much. One final question for you all as we wrap up. This is off script, so you're just gonna have to think on your feet here. But I'm wondering, for each of you, when you think about you know, ideally this project is approved by the congregation, it's completed, you know, several months from now, we're able to kind of open up, you know, we have enough people vaccinated, COVID cases have gone down, we're able to open our doors back up, be in the building again together. What is the thing you're most looking forward to doing?
Seeing people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Alan. 2 words. Nice job. He's our detail man, and that's perfect, Alan.
I was speaking with someone recently and they said, I asked them their experience from the pandemic and they said, you know, we can survive as individuals, but we thrive as community. And I think coming back, I think seeing our community is going to have a whole new meaning. And I can't wait to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, one of the things is being able to sing together again, without masks, you know, to breathe, feel the sound waves, right, of each other's voices, the reverberation, and to be able to do so without worry, right, without worry of getting sick and I think this improving the air quality is a big piece of how we can get to that place again. And it'll be a joy when we're able to.
It was different singing along with Verta Sunday, which I did, and singing together.
Yeah, because in the privacy of your home, you don't have to work, you know, and people, you can just be out of tune, and so there are some pluses to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I enjoy that plus. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you 3 for joining me today, and thank you to Barbara Conray, who's not present on the Zoom, but has done a lot of work on this, to the entire COVID task force, to the governing board, the executive team. There have been lots of folks who have participated in different ways. So anyone who's watching now or later, you can continue to check our weekly e-news for continuing updates on this project. And you can go to our website, ucmvt.org. Our great communications team has made it really easy to find information there. Frequently asked questions, links to various reports and resources. There are a couple more times coming up for discussion and sharing your feedback. This Sunday, May 30th, during our coffee hour after worship, will be a time when there'll be another short presentation and time to ask questions and make comments. We're looking to schedule a session during the evening, the week between that Memorial Day weekend and the special meeting. So check your e-news and the website for when that might be scheduled once the date's finalized. And our special meeting is scheduled for Sunday, June 6th, following that Sunday service. There'll be a formal warning going out at least 6 days in advance of that meeting. So especially if you're a church member, we really hope that you will attend, that you'll participate, you'll share your feedback, and get involved with this project. So thank you again, everyone, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, Joan.
Thank you, Joan. Thanks, everyone.